And then I experienced being touched inappropriately by adoptive family members. And then later down the road, being shamed for it when I became a teenager.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Adopted Gals podcast. As you can see, we have another interview with another adoptee, and her name is Monique. Before we get started, we want to let people know whether you're an adoptee or an adoptive parent. If you want to be on our podcast to get an interview, please reach out to us at adoptivegals@gmail.com. We would love to have you on the channel to tell your story. And secondly, even though we talk about a lot of different topics, we want to make it clear that we are for adoption, because I know some of our topics can come off like we don't want it, but we're just trying to educate people the best way that we can. And so the parent and the adopted child can have the best relationship as possible. Okay, so we're going to get started. So Monique, welcome to our channel. Tell the
Thank
audience a little bit about you, your adoption story, and who you are.
Yes, so thank you all, ladies, for having me. It is greatly much appreciated. It's such an opportunity to be here to talk to you ladies today and tell you all a little bit about my story. So I'm going to just start off by saying that I am a same race domesticated or domestic adoptee. So I was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Particularly during the crack cocaine era. I know this may be a little difficult for some people to listen to, but my story has a lot of truth around it, and it took me a long time to get here to be able to come forth with my story. We all know that during the 80s into the early 90s, crack cocaine flooded the streets of many inner cities, and we know that most inner cities have the majority of African American population. Unfortunately, my birth mother became, how do I say it? She became a statistic to that system, and she got addicted to cocaine. That was her choice of drug, and she did abuse this particular substance while she carried me. When I was about 6 months old, I was put into the system, and I stayed into the system until I was 7 years old, when my adoption was finalized. Now, I say 7 years old because that's when my adoption was finalized. However, I had been living with my adoptive family since I was about 4.5, almost 5 years old. It just
Okay.
wasn't until I was 7 when my adoption was finalized. At that point, we had moved from New Jersey and relocated to North Carolina, where I was raised. During the time that I was in foster care, when I came into my conscious thinking as a toddler, I started to remember events that took place. And one of the biggest events that I remembered when I came into my conscious thinking was that when I was with my first foster mother, I thought that was my mother.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she was very sweet to me. She was very kind. However, she did sit me down one day and told me that I was going to be leaving her. And I did not understand this. She had me and another little boy, and we were all black. And I just could not wrap my head around it. I thought that he was my brother. You know, it was a lot. And so I remember the day the social worker came and picked me up. I had a black trash bag with my belongings in it, and I was traumatized. I did not know what was going to happen. I'm just this tiny little girl, and she comes and picks me up, and I'm fighting with all of my might. There's nothing I could
Mm-hmm.
really do. I'm little. She just picked me right on up, put me in the back of her Honda Civic, and on to the next home I went. When I got to my second foster home, that is when I started to have a lot of behavioral issues. And some of those behavioral issues were outbursts of anger, but I was also starting to face being bullied by their foster children. I lived with two
Mm-hmm.
women. They had maybe about 4 or 5 foster boys. I can't remember how many, but they had more than 2. I know that. And they would pick on me and bully me, and it made me very confused. I was already confused, right? Because I had just got picked up and taken to my next foster home. I'm in this environment that I don't know. I have these two women that have decided to foster all of these children, and they weren't the nicest to me either. They would reprimand me if I would act out. And in these instances that I would act out, they would label them as being deliberate until, well, one day I started to self-abuse myself. So my self-abusing behaviors started at a very young age. I don't know if I was 3, I don't know if I was 4, but I remember it. There's this one time I tried to push a pencil through the roof of my mouth. Ooh. Another time where I ran out in the middle of the street to, I wanted to get hit by a car. I don't remember this instance, but I do remember trying to push the pencil through the roof of my mouth. And so because of this, the foster family was like, nope, So they sent me to another, not necessarily a foster home, but it was a pediatric psychiatric center. So I stayed there, and then this is when I met my adoptive, my soon-to-be adopted family. And from what I understand, and I'll give you all the backstory to how I, came into knowledge of all this information. They came in, my adoptive mother and my adoptive father. They had a meeting with me, and I went into their home. And this is probably, like, at this time I was about 4.5 years old. So around 1993, February 1993, that's when I went to go live with them. Now I'm living in their home, and everything seems to kind of simmer down a little bit. They had a daughter who is now my adopted sister. She's 5 years older than me, and she's adopted from a different biological family. Her and I are not of kin or related. And so everything seemed to be fine. I still had outbursts of anger, but what I started to realize was that when I would have these outbursts of anger, I would start to get reprimanded by my foster mother, soon to be adoptive mother. And that confused me. But they did seem to care about me. Now I was confused, but I'm a kid. So I'm like, I just want to play. I want to go outside, all of these things. And then maybe the next year, that very next year or that same year is when we moved down to North Carolina. Now, before we moved, my social worker at the time, because I remember my social worker, she came and picked me up and took me to an event for potential foster parents or potential parents who were looking to adopt. And I remember going to that event saying, I have a family. And I was very stubborn. I was very, headstrong about what I felt and what I believed. And so while I was at that same event, the previous foster parents were there. And I was like, I started screaming at the top of my lungs. I would not talk to them. I would not go near them, nothing. And they knew, because they didn't even try to come near me either. Like, I'm not playing these games with you all. And so I'm not exactly sure what happened after that event, but I left and I came back to my foster home, soon to be adoptive home. And shortly after that is when we moved down to North Carolina. So that's kind of like the beginning of my story. When I went into the system, I've learned, and like I said, I'll give you all the backstory to this. I learned that I was considered preschool handicapped.
You were considered what?
Yep, I was considered preschool handicapped. With being stubborn, and I had some health issues as well going on. Like I had a issue with my heart going on, malnutrition, a few other things. But we moved down to North Carolina, and I started kindergarten. I got through kindergarten, and I got through first grade. When I got to first grade, that was when my adoption was finalized. And I never forget this day, you guys, or ladies, I'm sorry. I never forget this day. The day that my adoption was finalized, my teacher, she comes and brings my folder to me that had my name on it. My original name is Monique Barnes. And she puts a sticker over it with my new last name. And I felt this sudden emptiness. Like, my life is now different. I don't have that name anymore. And then that's when I started to question, who am I? And that's kind of like where my story of adoption started.
That is so interesting that to you, you felt empty and not fulfilled, because a lot of adopted kids, like for me and Hawa, when we found out we were getting adopted, we were so thrilled about it and excited. I've never really heard anyone say they felt empty. It's such an interesting thing to hear, and you feel like you don't know who you are, or and it is because you felt like your last name was being taken away from you, or you've gone through so much that you just don't, at this point, it's like, what's going to happen?
It's a combination of both. So, you know, going through the system and experiencing the traumatic events that I experienced, that was like trauma to me. And being so scared, being so little, being so vulnerable, then we fast forward, I'm in this home. I'm already thinking in my head, when is the next time I'm going to be packed up and moved on to somewhere else?
There it is. Yep. It's that uncertainty, because a lot of we talk about adoption being born from trauma. Adoption is traumatic, because a lot of people try to make adoption look like, oh, this happy, amazing thing. But it's like, the child is facing trauma, especially if you are living in the foster care system and you're being ripped apart, ripped from home to home, and not having this and not having this sense of like safety net. You just feel like you're just floating. At any moment, you could just get moved to the next spot. So I can definitely, now that I hear more of that in your story, because a lot of the times I'm more friends with like people that are, that have other adoptees who are transracial adoption, especially being adopted from different countries. So we don't really get to hear stories about children who were adopted from the foster care system, and we're learning so much about that. And there is, similarities in being adopted, of course, but there's also differences in that. And so we're grateful that you're on here and shedding light on this when it comes to the foster care system and adoption and what goes through that, because I can't imagine the trauma in that.
Right. It was certainly a lot. Thinking back on it, when I started to do my inner work, I've been on this journey now for going on, it'll be 2 years next April. So that I really started to dig deep, because I went through a lot in my life. From my perspective, I went through a lot. Now I know that there are people who've been through way, way worse, but I want to focus on the experiences, that I went through. And I shout out to transracial adoptees, because they go through a lot. They go through a lot. Transracial adoptees, I have a few people that I'm connected with that I talk to, and hearing their stories, I'm just like, I don't know how I could have survived that, And so my hat tips to transracial adoptees and international adoptees as well.
I wanted to clarify for people. So your, because sometimes the terminology can be very confusing for people, whether it's like international, transracial. So for you personally, like with your while you were in foster care system, because you went, I think, through 4 different foster families. The 4th one you were adopted, right? So with all 4 of them, was it all like racial? Was it different race, or was it like also Black parents that you were that were fostering you, and then your adoptive parents, like were they white or same race?
So I am same race. So when I went through the foster care system, the first 2 homes were same race, and then I went to this psychiatric ward for pediatrics. I don't know if it was an orphanage, but in that era or in that setting, it was all of us, all races were there, all nationalities, all ethnicities were all in that particular setting. And to add to that, when I was in this pediatric psychiatric care unit, I remember just feeling so empty and so low there. I remember one night there was a fire alarm, and one of the nurses that was assigned to care for me, she was giving me a bath, and the fire alarm triggered me, and I started crying. And I'll never forget to this day, as we were leaving out the bathroom, she wrapped me up in a towel, and she just said, "It's going to be okay." as I cried, and I was crying. I'll never forget that to this day. I still think about the lady, where is she? She's still living, because this was like 30 years ago. So it was certainly a lot for me. And then that trauma got embedded. But yes, I went through all same race households throughout my foster care experience.
So now let me ask you, do you know your birth parents? Do you have any connections to them, or was it like a closed adoption?
So I did have a closed adoption. I want to say fast forward 2007, when MySpace was very popular. My biological sister found me, and I was actually getting ready to go off to college, and I get a message on MySpace saying, hi, my name is so and so. I'm your sister. And I look at her profile, and I'm like, she looks a lot like me. Is this, what is this? And so I tell my adoptive mother, and my adoptive mother was like, get out the way. And she sits down at the computer, and I never forget, she puts her hand over her face, and she was like, oh my God, this is your sister. And in my head, I'm like, well, I never knew I had a sister. So what's going on? Because all I knew growing up all these years is that I had two brothers. And so when I was in foster care, my social worker, she actually set up the meeting for me to meet with my biological brothers, two of them. It's 7 of us total. I'm number 6 out of 7. So she set up a meeting with us to meet, and it was a very happy day for me. I was so happy. I was like, these are my brothers. It's so cool, to meet them. They were also in the system as well, and they got adopted by another adopted family.
Yeah, that is so. Oh, go ahead, Howard. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, that's incredible for your sister to be able to find you. How did she how did she even know, one, that she had a sister, and how did she even, did she ever tell you how she found you in the first place and was able to make that connection? Because that's very smart for a child to be able to do that.
So my biological sister always knew that I was her sister, because when I went through the system, up until we moved down to North Carolina, my biological family kept tabs on me while I went through the system. Because what happened was, and I just learned this year, I learned how I actually got into the system. So how I got into the system, and I'll swing back around to answer the question. How I got into the system is my birth mother dropped me off at her sister's house to watch me.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure if my birth mother was still dibbing and dabbling in narcotics or not, but from what I understand is that while I was at their home, they called CPS to come and pick me up. And that is how I got into the system.
Oh, wow. So your mother had no idea, nobody had no idea, and you just damn near poof, gone.
Yes. Now, my biological brother, is one of my oldest, because like I said, it's 7 of us. So the second oldest was there when the situation happened, and he told me once I got to a place where I was ready to hear the story, and that was this year. He told me that next thing he knew was that CPS was at the door to pick me up, and he was fussing at them like, well, what are you doing with my sister? And so during that time, my maternal grandmother was very ill. And what I learned was that if she had not been so ill, she would have done everything she could have to keep me.
So were you the only one? So you weren't the only one adopted of your biological, like the siblings, right?
Correct. 3 of us are adopted. 2 of us were raised by a biological family, and the other 2 were raised by a birth mother, but they ended up in the streets and incarcerated.
Oh,
okay.
So in a way, it's almost like, I mean, I feel like there is always pros and cons to adoption, but in a way, if you had stayed with your birth mom, you could have been one of those statistics as well, where you could have been ended up in the streets.
Absolutely. I could have been in the streets, but I did not. I got adopted, and I'm thankful for the adoption. but it came with a lot of hurt. It came with a lot of trauma. It came with a lot of misunderstanding and not being educated on what adopted children go through, particularly those who went through the system. Um, my biological sister, to kind of go back to it, when she found me, like I said, I had no idea. And then to even corroborate, her knowing me, fast forward within the last couple of years, she started sending me baby photos of her and I together.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh.
And I never had that many photos of myself coming through the system. I had a photo of me and my biological brothers, and I had a photo that they took of me while I was in my second foster home. And the first photo with my biological brothers, they had me dressed really nicely. But the second photo, you could tell, something wasn't right. My hair wasn't combed. I had on clean clothes, but I was not to the appearance of what I felt I should have been. So that told me that there may have been some type of lack of care given to me.
And
And
I
so,
see. So it's understandable why your CPS was called in that regard.
So not CPS wasn't called during foster care. They called I guess the hospital come and pick me up when I was in foster care. Now when I was with my biological family, they called CPS because they felt that my biological mother wasn't doing what she needed to have been doing to take care of me. So that's how I ended up being placed in the foster care system. But then I also learned about what she went through growing up. Once I decided I wanted to learn more about my biological family, I started to learn about her childhood and what she went through. And she went through a lot of the same things that I went through growing up. When she was a child, her mother remarried her sister's father. And her sister's father was touching her inappropriately and having her touch him. And that caused her to run away to live with her grandmother. It caused her to develop a lot of psychological trauma and lashing out on her own sisters because she didn't know how to articulate what was going on in the home.
Yeah, so just a lot of trauma that just seems to have gotten passed on. And
absolutely. So a lot of trauma. She ended up being in and out of jail because of it, because of the behaviors that she chose and the things that she decided to do, straining the relationship between her and her sisters until she decided to become sober. So I think she's been sober now for about 20 years, but it did take a toll out on her physically and mentally, but she's still living. I have not met her. But I did get a chance to meet my biological father, and I met him about 8 years ago. He has since passed away, but I did have an opportunity to meet him.
I'm so sorry.
What was your relationship, or like, what was the relationship with the father? Like, was he ever, was he present throughout this process, or tell us a little bit more about that.
My biological father or my adopted?
Your biological father.
So I did not have much of a relationship with him, and this is kind of where I have to talk about my adopted family. So when my biological sister found me, I believe this triggered my adoptive mother, and I think it triggered her to a point of where she felt afraid that I was going to leave her, because one of the things that I learned about my adoptive mother growing up is that she did not like being alone.
Okay.
And so when they found me, she started to, tell me, well, remember who raised you. I'm your mother. Things could have been differently for you. You don't know them. And so because of that, I developed a wall. And in that wall, I would not allow him in. Now, we did write back and forth for a while, and I still kept his letters to this day. But as time went on, I stopped writing him because of the amount of questions my adoptive mother was asking me. And so I said, I guess I feel like I have to pick a side. And I chose to put him on the back burner and focus on my adopted family relationship, which was very tumultuous to say the least.
How old were you at this point?
So at this point, when I met my biological family, was in contact with them, I was about 18. So I was 18, about to turn 19, and that relationship has had many ups and downs because they come from one environment, I come from another environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I was raised to go to school, get a corporate job, which I could talk about that more. Go into the military. I became very successful. Whereas a lot of my biological family did not get a lot of the same lessons. I don't know how to say this because I don't want to disrespect anybody or come off harsh, but pretty much we had two different upbringings, and so that caused a lot of clashing. So even with my biological family, they felt that I was fed with a silver spoon. And it may have looked nice on the outside, but on the inside, behind closed doors, I was going through a lot with my adopted family, particularly my adoptive mother.
From all the trauma that you've been through and unpacking that. Now, going back to the relationship with your father, why you felt like you had to stop talking to him because of, your adopted mom asking questions, which I know that a lot of adoptees struggle with that in learning how to figure out how to love both. And fortunately for me, my parents kept that door open and made it okay and told me, it's okay for you to love both. And unfortunately, in that case, it doesn't sound like that's, what happened, which is very sad because I felt like it should have been kept open for you to know where you came from. Because in order for you to heal through your adoption journey, you have to know where you came from, what was life like, your family and all of that. And outside of that, also knowing like health issues and concern and just being connected to them to know, okay, so this is who I am is such a beautiful thing. And I'm sorry that you felt like you had to cut off your biological father because your adoptive mom wasn't wanting that to happen.
Right. I'm not I can't say she did not want to it to happen, but I will say it was kind of like, make sure you are loyal to me first.
Okay.
So one of the things that I had to learn just by sitting back and watching my adoptive mother is that she puts a lot of value into loyalty, whether it's right or wrong, because of her own issues. And I'll kind of just switch it just a little bit for a second, just to kind of focus on, the issues I've had with my adopted family. Like I grew up with facing a lot of criticism, getting bullied, being chastised for my behavior, when really I was just a very broken soul who had been put through the system. Then I come into this family, and then I experienced being touched inappropriately by adoptive family members. And then later down the road, being shamed for it when I became a teenager. And I talked about this a lot in a couple other podcasts that I did, but today I don't want to focus too much on it. But I will say that when I became a teenager, I'm going through hormones, I'm questioning my identity even more. And we go through a very big break in the family where I thought this was my forever home, ended up being broken. And how it was broken is that my adoptive mother and my adoptive father got a divorce. And I had only been in their home for about 5 years when this occurred. For 5 years. Those first 5 years were up and down. During those first 5 years, I experienced being touched inappropriately, being introduced to inappropriate things, but I still loved my family. I think if our family had stayed together, I would have been able to have a decent, more honest, open conversation with them. But when the family got broken, it broke my adoptive mother even more. And so where she messed up was the same year that she got divorced, she remarried. And that hurt me and confused me even more, because now you're introducing another person into my life when I've already been through 2 foster homes, orphanage, psychiatric ward, coming to your home. So I'm constantly being introduced to new people. I don't know these people. And it caused, going through that experience where my adoptive family got broken, my adoptive mother remarrying, that made me very resentful to her because I'm thinking, this is my forever home. So then I'm being introduced to new people, having to learn their personality, having to learn, the baggage that they bring with them, their children, being introduced to them. So it opened up a whole big can worm of just chaos. And then as I get into middle school, those self-abusing behaviors start to come back. So I haven't talked about this, but I want to tell you all this story because I was going through so much. Not only am I getting, criticized heavily at home, but I'm also getting whippings for bringing home bad grades. I got to a point where I just could not take it anymore. So when I was in about 6th or 7th grade, I remember climbing out of my window onto the rooftop. I wanted to jump.
Oh my gosh.
I was in middle school, and my adoptive family took it, or my adoptive mother took it as a deliberate action, as if I wanted attention. But because I had already been broken down so much, I don't know myself. I don't know how to express myself. I only know how to express myself in anger because I don't know how to really articulate my feelings.
Yeah, and that, sorry to cut you off, and that seems to be a very common thing in adoptive parents, like, because a lot of, again, adoptions is supposed to be this beautiful thing, and then the child starts to experience these behaviors. It comes off as, oh, you just do that on purpose for attention, but it's like, no, it's trauma that I'm experiencing, and I don't know how to express it. I don't know how to talk about it. So it's not me doing things on purpose. And I experienced stuff like that too, where I was basically accused of doing things on purpose just to hurt people. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to process all the trauma that I've been through. So if you are an adoptive parent and you're watching this right now and you have a child that is acting out, please, for the love of God, don't think they just want to do it just to do it. Your child is literally trying to figure out how to exist in this world and deal with the trauma that they've been through. And I also want to ask you, finish what you were saying before and then answer, like, did they put you in therapy to help you with this?
So therapy did not come along until I was in high school.
Okay.
And when I went to therapy, I was too afraid to really talk to the therapist because I was not sure what she was going to tell my adoptive mother. Okay. So my adoptive mother had a way of trying to, figure out what I was thinking or talking about. And she violated my trust in many ways. There was another time after that incident occurred, when I got to high school, I wanted to run away, but I didn't know who. I didn't know where to go to. So I acted like I left the house, but I came back in the house and I hid in the bathroom. I didn't know where to go. So while they're all outside, running around, yelling my name, I'm like, when they find me, how am I going to explain this to them? And so when they found me, again, I was shamed. And as a form of punishment, my adoptive father at the time lived about 30 minutes on the other side of town. I was sent to his house on the weekends. And at this point, I'm confused about the relationship between my adoptive mother, me, my adoptive father, and my adoptive sister, because I really didn't like going to my adoptive father's home because of how bad my adoptive mother spoke on him. And that relationship had nothing to do with me. I was a vulnerable child. I remember one time she took me to his house after they got divorced and sat me down while they argued about child support.
I was going to say,
pick this up.
That's not a place for a child to be hearing.
With when, even with biological families, like when there's a divorce or split, like kids generally automatically think like it's their fault or they have something to do with it. Now, adding adoption, I'm sure that's like a whole nother mixture of complications. Like, did that ever run through your head that, okay, this is my fault because I was adopted, I'm causing all these problems, like that's why they want a divorce? Or did that not really come up for you?
I never knew. Well, I will say this. I always knew it was not my fault because my adoptive mother would, push in our head, oh, your father was having issues with infidelity. But that has nothing to do with me, ma'am. And so, and I hate to, make it as a joke, but this is how, I cope. but this had nothing to do with me. And then I learned later on down the line that it was my adoptive father that said, well, let's adopt her. Let's adopt Monique. Now, whether they wanted to do that for, monetary reasons, because they were able to get benefits, like I could get Medicaid. Apparently, adoptive families can get stipends of some sort for their child. I'm not sure if that was the case for me. But that can be the case, especially when you adopt a special needs child. So I'm not exactly sure how far that went. But I never felt that I was the issue. I always knew that there was an issue between her and him. Now, my adoptive father never spoke on it. He was always just very quiet. And he would just say, well, your mom, she's, fussing again. And, it made me try to figure out, well, who am I loyal to? I felt like I was kind of stuck in the middle. And so I always loved my adoptive father, even though he did what he did. He did do some interesting things, but not as big and dramatic as my adoptive mother. When I got to high school and I talked about the situation where I tried to run away, she then sat me down not too long after that, and this was our conversation. She sat down and I was standing up, and we were in her dining room, and she asked me, why are you acting out so bad? And I remember as plain as day. It was a sunny day outside. I think I had just probably got home from school, and she was like, Monique, why are you acting out so bad? And I said, I looked down, I was looking around, and I told her the first thing that came to my heart. And I said, I miss my biological family. And her response to that was, that's not a justification for your behavior. You need to take your anger out on your biological mother, not me. And that hurt me because you don't know my biological mother. At this point, I didn't know where they were, what they were doing with their lives, but I felt a sense of sadness, and I felt a sense of rejection. I felt abandoned in that moment. I didn't feel supported. It always felt like everything that I did was an issue, that I was not happy or grateful for my adoption. I could have been somewhere else, and she's absolutely right. But my adoptive mother lacked the emotional intelligence. She lacked empathy. It was always about a way to please her ego in some type of way. And so I was always the talk of the town amongst her siblings, and she has a really big family. She has 10 siblings, 9 of which are still living. So she's, 9 out of 10 siblings or something like that. 8 out of 10, I think. And so it was a lot on me to not only deal with her, but also deal with how her family would view me, which some of them viewed me as, very, sweet. Others said she ain't gonna make it from college. Others would say she's immature. And they're right. I was immature. I did struggle in college. I didn't understand myself. And so I was fortunate to get an opportunity to go to college. My adoptive parents paid for me to go to school. And that was my great escape to get away from that home. Because I went through so much. I used to get whippings a lot. I remember one time got one so bad where I did not have to go to school the next day.
Oh my God. That is terrible. And that is why we push so hard on our channel for parents who want to adopt to go to therapy first, because your child that you're going to be adopting is coming with trauma already. And then because you have not dealt with your own trauma, you're adding even more things to your child, and you're blaming things on your child that has nothing to do with them. It is so important for adoptive parents to deal with their own crap, because I experienced some of the stuff that you're talking about. I kind of experienced that with my mother, my adoptive mother, in where she was projecting some of her stuff on me, the things that she experienced, and it just add more to my healing journey. Not only to heal from being, adopted and being given up. Now I got to heal from the things that happened between the both of us. And I do want to ask you, are you still in connection with your adoptive mom? Do you still have a relationship with her?
No. So the breaking point for me was April 2023.
Mm.
So I was in a crazy situation with a gentleman, let's just say that. And when it all ended, I started to pray and say, what is it that is holding me back? What is it that keeps me in these situations where I'm with emotionally unavailable men? I'm with men that like to fight and put their hands on women. I'm with men who just like to suck the energy out of me. What is it? And so in that prayer, God spoke very clear to me and said, you need to confront your family. You need to confront your adoptive mother. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this. This is going to be very hard. And he said, I will be with you. And so in April, there was a situation between her, my adoptive sister, and I was talking to my adoptive mother about something, then my adoptive sister, and somehow either I upset my adoptive sister and my adoptive mother. So my adoptive sister was like, well, why did you say this and why did you do that? And so I went to my adoptive mother and was like, why did you go back and say this? This is a conversation between me and you. And so then that's when I started to tell her how I felt. And when I told her about the abuse, the atrocities, how I felt, and it wasn't nice because at this point I was very angry still. So it came out exactly how it came out. Her only response to that was, I did not abuse you, yada, yada, yada. I hope you get the help you need. I mean, gut-wrenching pain. And God said, this is the beginning, stay the course. And so I had to then confront my adopted sister and tell her how I felt about her emotional neglect, giving me silent treatment, not just online, but when I would be deliberately in her face. And my adopted sister is a whole nother can of worms to talk about on a different time. But to focus on my adoptive mother, it was extremely difficult for me to have that conversation. And then I finally had to say, I have to walk away. And so after that, it was very hurtful for me. I was still working my job. I was still working in corporate America at that point. It was very confusing for me. And so the last time I saw her, though, was last July. And at that point, I started to share, post on social media, everything. I mean, at this point, I was on fire. And I'm still on fire to this day, just not as much. Just letting it all out. And they got whiff of it. This was before I started just deleting everybody. And when I saw her at this last event that I went to, it was a wedding, she could barely speak. She could barely speak to me. And I just never forget. She would, stare at me, before she tried to leave the event, she couldn't even hug me. It was kind of like looking at me in the distance, like, okay, well, I guess I'll see you when I see you.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. And I honestly, it sounds like I will never judge anyone on how they release, because I kind of had the same issue with my mom because I was angry and I was just letting her know everything.
Yeah.
And she kind of had the same response like you did with your mother. And basically, well, it is what it is. And it sounds like you were just purging everything. And I feel like as adoptees, there literally does come a point in time in your life where you just purge everything.
Exactly.
And I feel like it's so necessary in your healing journey. It has to happen because you've experienced so much, and it's like your whole life, everybody is basically making decisions for you and everything, and you're just there being bounced around, and it's like you just have to put up with this, and you're getting hurt so much in the process, and people dealing with their own crap, putting their own crap on you, and it just adds more where you're just like, I can't take it anymore. And honestly, you sitting here and telling your story is so emotional for me, because one, I'm an adoptee, I can connect, we both can connect to you, and I'm so proud of you for talking about this. And I can tell you've done a lot of self-awareness and healing just by the way you speak and healing. And that is amazing, because not a lot of people actually sit back and say enough is enough with this family member or that or this. I'm choosing me and myself and my life and how I want it to be, and I'm going to heal. So that is, I just want to say we're so proud of you for coming on here and telling your story, because it's not easy. It's not easy.
It's not easy for sure. There have been days where I did not think, like, I felt like my chest was actually caving in because I was so hurt. I was so broken. And for me, you know, my adoptive mother would tell me when I was a teenager, well, I guess life is going to have to teach you. And she was right. Life did teach me. I went through a lot of pain just coming into, you know, the adult world. And when I became an adult, now I'm accountable, right? So all that childhood stuff does not matter anymore. You're an adult. You can be charged like an adult. You can go to jail like an adult. And I'm going to even say this, the turning point, I've said this on other podcasts, the turning point for me really was in 2020, because a lot of things that my adoptive mother did was to garner sympathy for herself. It's like, what is that? Mark Hazen or Marching Saul or whatever. I can't say it by proxy. I cannot say his name.
Munchausen syndrome.
Munchausen by proxy syndrome, where the caregiver garners sympathy from others by making the child look like they have an issue, like they're sick, something's wrong with them. She made me believe for many years that I was allergic to shellfish. Well, 2 years ago, I said, let me try shellfish. No allergic reaction at all, right?
Wow.
But in 2020, and the crazy thing is, my adopted sister would always say, Monique, you're not allergic. But I think that my adopted sister has not come out of the fog herself, and she's 5 years older than me. I'm 36, she's 41. And she has kids, she's married now. And so she's living her life. But me, I said, I have to do my work, because I can't sit here just loathing in my sorrows anymore. I have to do something different. So in 2020, or 2019, I take that back. 2019, I was home for the holidays from active duty, and my adoptive mother was trying to get me to talk to her. And I was going through a hard time. I had experienced a breakup, and my adoptive family knows I don't like to talk when I'm in the mood. Leave me alone. Well, as always, she wants to probe and ask me, you know, what is the issue? Why don't you want to talk? Are you going to do this? Are you going to come with this? And I'm like, hey, I don't want to talk. I said it 2 times. On the 3rd time, I blew up. I was like, hey, I don't feel like bleeping talking. And at that point, she felt like she needed to reprimand me. I'm at this point 32 years old. And I guess she did not think that I would, you know, react. And I did. And as soon as I reacted, she grabbed her face, told her husband, you know, call the police. Monique just assaulted me. And I'm looking at you, the same face. I'm like, and I had my dog, and I'm like, you know, call the police. So while they're calling the police, she's calling her siblings. Everybody's come to the house. Oh, well, how's Monique done now? And at this very moment, I knew that I was being manipulated and gaslit for so many years to try to fit and conform to their ways when I'm just a totally different person.
Yeah, and it sounds like you were incredibly demonized too. Like demonized, made out to be the issue.
I was gonna say, because on the bio you mentioned that you felt like you were like the black sheep, like you grew up as the black sheep in the family. Right. And I know a lot of adoptees, like, especially if they have siblings, like they feel like whenever anything happens, they always get the blame. And it could be very irrelevant to that adoptee, but somehow the blame always ends up getting back to them. Did you feel that way, like with your mom and your dad, or mainly just with the relationship with the mom?
So more so with my adoptive mother. Now, my adoptive father, he had his ways too. He was extremely emotionally unavailable. He was nonverbal. So, you know, my dad was, when he spoke, and it was like he would speak to a point where he would put fear in you. And my adopted sister, she has her own experience with my adoptive father, because she was with her more than I was with him until they got divorced. So she, you know, grew up in the house up until she was like 16, maybe 17 before they got divorced. And so she saw a lot. But my experience, because I was raised more so by my adoptive mother, I faced a lot of hardship with her, especially when my adopted sister went off to college. At that point, it was like, you know, my protection from, you know, experiencing more and more trauma was gone because she was off to school, off to college, doing her thing. She would come home every now and then, but for the most part, she was in college. And so during those years, between 2001 to 2007, it got extremely bad. And those times became so traumatic to me that when I became an adult, I didn't know how to navigate my adult life. I didn't know, how to act around people. Either I was too obnoxious or I was too quiet. And many people, labeled me as, I'm not going to say like crazy, obnoxious. And a lot of those things would hurt me because I'm like, you don't even know me. You don't even know what I've been through. But I didn't know how to tell people that before because in my head, I've been conditioned to believe, this is all that you have. When really there's more. I have the opportunity. If any point I want to get in my car and drive to New Jersey, I can to go see my birth mother. But I'm not ready to just yet because I'm still working on some other things. The same with my sister, my biological sister who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. I can go down and visit her anytime, and I could go and talk to my adoptive mother anytime. But right now, it's just not that time because I need time, and I feel that my adoptive mother needs more time. I do worry because she's older. She's had some health issues, but I can't worry. I can't keep worrying about her because the bed has been made, and I said I have to get out of it. I have to get out of it. I have to get out here and live my life. And one of the things her aunt, which is my great aunt who's still living, she told me before I decided to just go cold turkey, she's like, you have to go live your life. She told me, you're an accountable adult now. You got to let that go. You got to go live your life. And so that's all I've been doing. And it's not been easy. It's been very confusing. It's been very, lonely. But I made a decision that, hey, I want better for myself and I want better for my adopted family, you know?
It's needed. That it's so needed for you to choose yourself, because if you don't do this, you're just going to be in limbo and not and confused. And the longer you do it, the more you're going to find yourself and the more fulfillment you find. And you're going to, because I've gone through, like, you and I are very similar in finding and taking a step back and be like, it's about me. I'm going to focus on me. And the more you find yourself, the more you're going to discover parts about you that you just did not realize existed. And it's so exciting. And it gets to the point where it's so fulfilling, to the point where you're like, even if I never make up with my family and things never work out how I wanted them to, I'm still going to be okay. Like, it becomes like, I'm okay. I'm happy with me and who I am. It's an incredible feeling. So what is it? Is it recommend? Is it I commend you? It's commended.
Oh, thank you.
I commend you for that. For you to,
you've done a lot of healing, and I think a lot of adoptees, like, they don't go through the process that you do because a lot of times they don't even know where to start. And even with, like you mentioned, you had some health issues, like, even with your health issues and you working in a professional level, like, you were still able to prioritize your mental and well-being. And that's like so important. Like Famata was saying, we can tell that you've been through this process, just the way you talk about your story, and where you're just not stuck on just like the past, but wanting to understand the past and being able to move forward with that understanding, and so I think it's beautiful, hearing your story. It really is.
It got worse. Like, after I cut off contact with them, I lost my corporate job. So I lost my corporate job. I had accommodations for my health issues, and I ended up having a mental breakdown at work one day, said the wrong thing at the wrong time, and I lost my job. And it put me on a path to really start to read more about just who I am as a Black woman, right? Because working in these corporate spaces, especially when they see that you're vulnerable, because they see that, they use that as an excuse to pick on you. And I became a statistic. I'm not gonna say a victim. I became a statistic to that system. I became a statistic to that system, unfortunately, and it really made me question a lot about, especially what's going on in today's current climate. So I started to do a lot of reading. I started to do a lot of research. I started to do a lot of journaling. And I've always liked to write. I've always liked to read, but I was pushed to read, books like nonfiction books. Like, I want to read something with some type of historical context now that I understand, my journey. And I will say this, and this is not to brag, but another reason why I was able to also start this journey is because my adoptive father passed away too. He passed in 2020.
Wow.
When he passed away, I was very fortunate to get my adoption/foster records. Do you know how hard that is for us to obtain? That is so hard.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate, and it's a document that's about maybe 60 to 90 pages long. Some of it repeats itself, but it told me everything I needed to know about how I got into the system, the family history, and about all my siblings. These documents have been sitting in my adoptive father's home since they took me into their house in his briefcase. And it's so interesting because his closet was upstairs in the house, and he would go tell me to go find his slacks, his shoes, and his briefcase held the door open. And I would just always, me, because I feared my father, me, and respected him, I didn't go through his stuff only unless he told me to go get something. And so I would always look down at his briefcases, burgundy, classic, old school briefcase that he has since probably 1977. From when he, worked in corporate America, and it was full, like it wouldn't close because it had so much stuff in it. And so my adoptive sister, during his repast, she handed me the record, and I was like, "What is this?" I opened it and I said, "Yo," and like at first I didn't know how to process it, so I seemed to act happy about it, like, oh my god, but really I was very confused.
Yeah.
And then I was also able to get a copy many years ago of my original birth certificate that my paternal grandmother kept. So I know my birth mother's name is on the birth certificate, and my original name. My first two names weren't changed. My name is Monique Michelle, but my last name was the only name that was changed.
Wow.
So I've been very fortunate to get these nuggets, and I have a box, like a box that I keep a lot of memories in.
With getting that record, did it help with your healing and feeling a little more whole inside yourself?
Yes. And it also answered a lot of questions when I talked to my biological brother a few months ago, and he told me about how I got into the system, and my biological sister sending me a letter that our biological mother wrote her that talked about her upbringing. I need to find someone that can decode it, because a lot of the words in the writing I can't, really figure out. But I hope that one day I can find someone that can decode the writing, and so that I can actually read the entire letter. But I was able to read some of the things about some of the experiences that she had, being touched inappropriately and running away from home to live with our maternal her grandmother, which was my great grandmother.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's incredible.
I wanted to say something I didn't get the chance to say, but when you were talking about when you were, I think, about like 18 years old, and your sister, your biological sister, got in contact with you, and your adoptive mom kind of felt like she had to make it a point for you to be loyal to her. Like, I just wanted to say that, to me, like, I guess I wasn't, maybe, I don't know if not too surprised the right word or wording, but I feel like in a way it kind of makes sense, because on the one hand, you're turning 18, you're leaving the house, like you're learning about yourself, and you have to learn what identity meant for you outside and independent of your adoptive family. And then on top of that, now you're like reconnecting with your biological family. Like, that must have felt like everything was shaking up for her, because now it's like you have a whole new world available for you. you know, in all areas, and what role does she even play, like, in that,
And
you
and I
know?
think, yeah, and I think it will shatter her control that she's had of you for so long.
Exactly,
It
yeah.
will
Absolutely.
shatter all of that, all the things that she put in your head about who you are, putting you in your box and what you're supposed to be. Now that you're breaking out of that, you're going to find out the truth. And
Right.
that I also think was also very scary for her. And just
Right.
like, I'm no longer going to have the control that I had on
Right.
her.
And
And
it's
I
so
grew up,
crazy to me. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I grew up in a very heavily controlled environment. And, just being a Black woman, I now understand why, a lot of my younger years, being in such a controlled environment. One, I'm a vulnerable child that came from the system. And then two, we have to think about in the African American community, a lot of the things that we've experienced in our own homes with, inappropriate touching, domestic violence, abuse. And so during that silent generation, the baby boomers, then the boomers, it was like, do as I say, not as I do type of mentality, or you're going to suffer consequences. And that's a lot of what I had to experience growing up. And as a millennial, I would say maybe I'm not an older millennial. I'm probably like more of a newer millennial. I grew up just having to, just keep quiet, this is the best thing for me. Like when I talked about when I tried to or wanted to run away from home, I had no idea where I was going to go. The internet wasn't wide at that point. I didn't know about social services. All I knew is don't pick up the phone and call 911. It was just so much within our community. And so now, we're in an era where we're with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and they don't play. They're going to say it how it is. And so,
Yeah.
I've learned so much from our younger generations, and they've actually helped me come forth and share my story. Absolutely.
That's
And
beautiful.
being in such a controlled environment, I was an easy target. Yes, I may be a pretty girl and beautiful, but I was an easy target to men. And I thought that, oh, well, he likes me, I'm cute, that they actually like me back. And that was far from the truth. And so I had a lot of experiences with really bad relationships where, they didn't like me, they were using me, or I met someone really nice, and because I didn't trust them based on the things that I went through, I was a total crash out. And so I had to learn, not to allow myself in those situations when it comes to relationships. And I've taken myself off the market. It's been almost a year for me now, no type of connection,
Wow.
nothing. And this has allowed me really to come in tune with who I really am. It's been very healing. For
That's
sure.
good.
Thank you,
Yeah.
ladies.
I love to hear that. I love to hear that for you. And honestly, I feel like we don't even have to say this because I already know what's going to happen, but continue on your journey, your
Thank
self-healing
you.
journey. I feel like you've made that as like your mission, and that's so important to be introduced to the new version of who you are, and I mean, I'm not worried about you at all. Like, you have such a
Thank you,
like
ladies.
strong head over your shoulders, and I pray that you'll continue to have some sort of support system as you're going on this journey. And it seems like for our audience, like, Monique is really taking it upon herself to share her story, and she's not just holding it in for herself, but she's allowing other people to be a part of this experience, of this journey. And I think it's beautiful because so many other like adults from who were adopted from the foster care system, like, they need this type of information. They need this type of community to be able to connect and tell them the truth, because it's a lot of hush hush. I feel like with
Absolutely.
the people that were adopted from the system, like,
It's
um,
taboo. It's taboo.
it's very
Yeah.
taboo. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very, very
Yeah.
taboo. And so I really pray that you get the support, and you'll always have our support, like, 100%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I would say this too. I think there needs to be more of an emphasis too on birth mothers getting the care and attention that they deserve, because what they went through was not their fault. With their upbringing or the choices that they made. Of course, we all
Yeah.
make mistakes, but that does not mean that oh, well, she's worthless. So when I tried to talk to my birth mother, it's very difficult for her to express herself because she harbors a lot of guilt. And I want to be able to, I can't change it, but I want to be, maybe a person that'll help her see things in a different perspective. And so in this journey that I'm on, now that I'm no longer working, I said, I'm going to take up, a different a career. So I'm going to go back to school and really get in tune with my more creative side. I used to be very corporate, very proper, and now it's like, I can finally let my hair down and just be myself.
Yeah. And when it comes, and when this is how I know you are truly healing and doing the work, because when it comes to healing, you look at all the aspects of the people that have hurt you. And that has also helped me so much in my healing journey.
Absolutely.
Looking at my birth mother, what she went through, and also my adopted mother, what she went through, because she also experienced things in life and she was hurt. So like hurt people. And then
Absolutely.
it's like you are making the choice, both you and I are making the choice, and also Hawa, in breaking the generational curses and be like, it stops with me. Well, we're no longer going to keep doing this and continue the cycle of the things that we've experienced. And it's amazing to see that you are, and it also helps with like forgiving, for sure, forgiving, right, and letting that just helps releasing, and for you, right, to really get to a point of true healing.
Yeah, and I hope the same thing too for my adopted sister, even though, and I will say this, my adopted sister, she was adopted straight out of the hospital. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. They came and picked her up. So the only thing that she has is probably subconscious memories, right? So she doesn't have any recollection of going through the system. She stayed in the hospital until they came and picked her up, and this is all she's known. But she did have a feeling that she was different. And she did have a conversation with my adoptive mother asking if she was adopted when she was about 8 or 9. And so my adopted sister has her own journey, and I pray, that she raises her children and doesn't give them such a hard time that I have. If she sees this is my message to her. Do not raise those girls, to go through the things that I went through. Protect those girls.
And heal if you have, and if she hasn't, heal, because it's needed before
Absolutely.
You have children.
Absolutely.
Go to therapy. Start there. If you don't know how to heal, just go to therapy. Just seek like professional help. That's all you have to start with. Because sometimes you don't know the right books to read. You don't know. But part of healing is just being able to understand your own narrative. And when you talk to somebody about the narrative that's going on in your head, about your history, your past, your present, you'll really be able to see some like tidbits of truth that you weren't really able to like fully understand. I think it's a great starting point, honestly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And it's like you taking that step and saying, I want this for myself. That's the biggest step of all. And then once you do that, everything just comes together. Monique, is there anything else you want to add to the conversation? Because we typically try to keep our interviews an hour.
I understood. The only question, I did have a question for you all both. Are you all adopted sisters?
Oh no. We're not adopted sisters. We basically, it's so funny because when people ask me about my time, like think about her, like a sister version of me. Like we've had this very similar life stories, but we were both adopted out of an orphanage in Sierra Leone. So we have very similar upbringing. But she just went to Minnesota and I went to California.
Yeah. So we've known each other since the age of 8 and 9. So we knew each other in the orphanage. And then when we both got adopted, we used to visit each other in the summertime. So we kind of had this like connection of helping each other out, basically figure out America, basically like all the things that we're going through. So we've gotten super close because of that. So it's like we're like basically sisters at this point. Yeah.
Wow. Bless you all's relationship. Honestly, that is something I have always wanted to have, which is like a best friend. But how I was raised to, find a neurotypical person when I'm actually neurodivergent. So you know, it just was like oil and water trying to find friendships, and then people being able to see how vulnerable I was and take advantage of me. So bless you all's relationship. Thank you both for what you all are doing, and also helping others heal. I'm pretty sure this is healing for you all as well.
Yeah,
Thank you
it
so
has
much.
been for both of us.
And I
That's
wanted to
good.
also say, you know, like I said earlier, you are out here, you're trying to spread your message and your story. And so if you can tell our audience like where they can find you,
Sure.
and this, you know, view some of the work
If you
that
want
you're
to be
doing right
found.
now, if you want to share.
Absolutely. No problem. So I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Well, we already know where TikTok is about to go next year.
Girl,
But
girl.
it is adoptee with two E's journal. So the two E's adoptee two E's journal. All together. No periods, no dashes, anything. So both on TikTok and Instagram, and also on Threads. I actually just started getting on Threads recently. So, but Facebook, I'm not on Facebook that much, and then we don't know what's going to happen with TikTok. But that's where you ladies and anybody else who's wanting to come and find me, that is where I am.
And we'll
That's great.
also post your
Yeah.
handle so that people can just directly be able to link
Okay.
on. But definitely
Absolutely.
check out Monique's story, and I know she does other interviews as well, and she's very, very well spoken and very just like has so much good stuff to say. So she's really a joy to listen to.
Thank
Yeah.
you, ladies, so much for having me today.
Thank
Of
you so much,
course.
Monique, for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
thank you guys out there who are watching for joining us for another episode. We hope this was informative. This was amazing. It's been an amazing conversation. This is my favorite part of doing Adopted Gals podcast is talking to other adoptees. It's so fulfilling and healing. So don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Till next time. Bye.
Bye, Monique.
Bye.
Thank you.